You know that feeling when you wake up and nothing matters? When every action feels hollow, every goal seems arbitrary, and the voice in your head whispers, "What's the point?" There's something terrifying happening in that moment that most people desperately try to avoid understanding. Have you ever noticed how everyone around you seems to be running from this same feeling? Filling their days with distractions, clinging to beliefs that feel increasingly hollow, pretending that their busyness means something. You're not imagining it. You're actually seeing through a veil that most people spend their entire lives maintaining. And that ability to see through it, that's both your curse and your greatest opportunity. This might be the most dangerous psychological territory a human being can enter. What I'm about to share has been systematically suppressed, not by some conspiracy, but by our own collective fear of confronting it. Because once you truly understand what's happening when everything feels pointless, you can never go back to the comfortable illusions. But here's the thing, staying in that feeling without understanding it, that's what destroys people. It's what Friedrich Nietzsche called the greatest danger facing modern humanity. And he discovered something about it that changes everything. In 1882, a German philosopher wandering through the Swiss Alps had a revelation so profound it made him physically ill. Friedrich Nietzsche, already suffering from chronic pain and isolation, suddenly understood why an entire civilization was heading toward what he called the greatest crisis. He saw that within 100 years, millions would experience exactly what you're feeling right now, that terrifying sense that nothing has inherent meaning. But unlike everyone else who saw this coming, Nietzsche discovered something hidden within this crisis, a secret door that only opens when all other doors have closed. Let me tell you what I mean. By the end of this video, you'll understand why that feeling of pointlessness isn't a bug in your psychology, it's a feature. You'll see why the people who seem most confident in their purposes might actually be the most lost. And you'll discover a path that Nietzsche carved out that's so radical, so transformative, that most people who encounter it either run from it or never truly understand it. But here's what nobody tells you about meaninglessness. In 1889, Friedrich Nietzsche was walking through the streets of Turin when he witnessed a man beating a horse. What happened next would become legendary. The philosopher threw his arms around the animal's neck, sobbing, before collapsing into madness from which he never recovered. But 7 years before that breakdown, Nietzsche was sitting in his sparse room in Sils Maria, Switzerland, wrestling with an insight that felt like staring directly into an abyss. He called it the death of God, but he wasn't talking about literal theology. Nietzsche was observing something far more profound, the collapse of every system humanity had ever used to assign meaning to existence. You see, for thousands of years, humans had outsourced meaning to something beyond themselves, gods, cosmic purposes, absolute moral laws. But Nietzsche realized these were all human creations. Projections we'd forgotten were projections. In his notebook, he wrote, "The greatest recent event, that God is dead. That belief in the Christian God has become unbelievable, is already beginning to cast its first shadows over Europe." He saw educated people going through the motions of belief while privately doubting everything. He watched societies maintaining moral systems whose foundations had already crumbled. But here's where it gets interesting. Nietzsche wasn't celebrating this collapse like some might expect. He was terrified, not of losing God, but of what he saw coming next. A psychological and cultural catastrophe he called nihilism, from the Latin nihil, meaning nothing. The belief that nothing matters, nothing has value, nothing is worth doing. Now, I want to be very clear about something. Nietzsche wasn't causing this crisis. He was diagnosing it. Like a doctor identifying a disease before symptoms fully manifest, he saw the psychological tsunami approaching. And just like a disease, he believed nihilism would spread through stages, each more dangerous than the last. This same pattern exists today, but it's evolved into something even Nietzsche might not have anticipated. We've been taught to fill the void with consumption, achievement, likes, followers, anything, to avoid confronting the fundamental question: what if there really is no inherent point to any of this? Society operates on a kind of mass agreement to not think about this too deeply. We wake up, go to work, pursue goals we didn't choose, in a system we didn't design, for reasons we can't fully articulate. And when someone stops and asks why, really asks it, they're often labeled as depressed, lazy, or problematic. But what if I told you that this feeling of pointlessness isn't a malfunction? What if it's actually your psyche detecting something real, the absence of any cosmic guarantee that your life matters? You see, We're swimming in an ocean of inherited meanings that no longer hold water. Our parents' purposes, society's values, cultural narratives, they're all dissolving like salt in rain. Think about how we use the metaphor of drowning to describe this feeling, drowning in meaninglessness. But Nietzsche discovered something remarkable. What if the problem isn't that we're drowning, but that we're trying to breathe underwater? What if we're using the wrong organ for the wrong element? The truly subversive insight Nietzsche offers is this: feeling that everything is pointless isn't the problem. It's the beginning of the solution. It's your authentic response to detecting that the old sources of meaning were always illusions. The question isn't how to make the feeling go away. The question is, what do you do once you've seen through the illusion? But what if I told you that most people, even those who think they've found meaning, are actually still trapped in what Nietzsche called incomplete nihilism? They've replaced old gods with new ones: success, love, impact, legacy, without realizing these are just more sophisticated ways of avoiding the fundamental confrontation with meaninglessness. The first thing Nietzsche discovered was that nihilism isn't a philosophical position. It's a psychological event that happens when your will to truth finally destroys the lies you need to believe. It's what happens when honesty becomes stronger than comfort. You see, nihilism is like a controlled burn in a forest. For years, maybe decades, you accumulate beliefs about why things matter, deadwood of inherited meaning. Your career matters because success equals worth. Relationships matter because love gives life purpose. Achievements matter because they'll be remembered. But then something happens. Maybe it's a loss, a failure, or just a moment of clarity. And suddenly, you see these meanings for what they are: human constructs with no cosmic backing. The mechanism works like this. We inherit values that secretly hate life. They say, life is only good if it serves God, or life is only meaningful if it leaves a legacy, or life is only worthwhile if it reduces suffering. Notice the pattern? Every traditional meaning system says life itself isn't enough. It needs to be justified by something beyond itself. Nietzsche called this life-denying, because it treats existence like a means to an end rather than valuable in itself. It's like saying a tree is only worthwhile if it produces fruit, never appreciating the miracle of the tree itself. When these life-denying values inevitably collapse because deep down we sense their dishonesty, we're left with the conclusion that life really is worthless. We've been trained to devalue existence, so when the training falls apart, we're left with nothing. But here's the profound part. This mechanism of nihilism is actually your psyche trying to heal itself. It's rejecting false medicines because somewhere, deep in your being, you know they're placebos. The depression, the sense of pointlessness, the inability to care about what you're supposed to care about, these aren't symptoms of illness. They're symptoms of awakening honesty. Nietzsche observed this pattern repeatedly in history. He studied how the Romans, at the height of their power, began experiencing widespread meaninglessness, what they called tedium vitae, the tiredness of life. Despite conquering the known world, despite unprecedented wealth and power, educated Romans increasingly felt that nothing mattered. He noticed the same pattern in Buddhism, which he deeply respected. The Buddha's first noble truth, that life is suffering, was an honest confrontation with meaninglessness. But where Buddhism sought escape from the cycle of existence, Nietzsche wondered, what if we could affirm existence, not despite suffering and meaninglessness, but including them? In his notebooks, he documented case after case. The European of today has learned to disbelieve in everything, but has not learned to create anything. He watched his contemporary Schopenhauer conclude that life was suffering and therefore should be denied. He saw Wagner, his former friend, retreat into Christian mysticism when confronted with the void. Each reacted to nihilism by trying to escape it rather than transform it. The pattern was always the same: confront meaninglessness, panic, then either deny it through new illusions or collapse into passive acceptance. But Nietzsche saw a third way. This shows up in your life when you achieve something you've worked toward for years, only to feel empty afterward. When you scroll through social media feeling simultaneously bored and anxious. When you can't explain why you should get out of bed beyond habit or obligation. If you've ever felt like you're going through motions without believing in them, you're experiencing what Nietzsche predicted. The modern world runs on what he called incomplete nihilism. We've lost faith in traditional meanings, but desperately cobble together substitute meanings to avoid confronting the void. Think about hustle culture preaching that you must find your purpose or follow your passion, as if purpose is something you discover rather than create, or the wellness industry promising that the right morning routine will fill your existential emptiness. These are nihilistic responses disguised as solutions, because they still assume meaning must come from outside yourself. You're told to find yourself, as if you're a fixed thing waiting to be discovered, rather than a continuous creation. This is incomplete nihilism, maintaining the structure of old meaning systems while swapping out the content. But that's not the most profound part. What Nietzsche discovered next completely inverts how we think about strength and weakness, damage and gift. Because hidden within nihilism, within that very feeling of pointlessness that seems to destroy people, lies what he called the greatest opportunity in human history. But to access it, you first have to understand something about power that almost no one truly grasps. Now, you might be thinking, if nothing has inherent meaning, doesn't that lead to despair? That's exactly what everyone assumes. But Nietzsche discovered the opposite. The absence of inherent meaning is precisely what makes genuine meaning possible. Think about a broken vase repaired with gold, the Japanese art of kintsugi. The cracks aren't hidden, they're highlighted, making the vase more beautiful than before it broke. Nietzsche saw nihilism the same way. The shattering of false meanings creates space for something unprecedented. He introduced a concept that changes everything: the will to power, not power over others. That's a crude misunderstanding. The will to power is the fundamental drive in all life, to overcome resistance, to grow, to express itself more fully. In humans, this primarily takes the form of self-overcoming, the ability to transform yourself, to create values, to give style to your character. You see, when traditional meanings collapse, most people experience only the loss. But Nietzsche realized this creates an unprecedented opportunity. For the first time in history, humans can consciously create their own values rather than inheriting them. The absence of cosmic meaning doesn't diminish human meaning. It makes it possible. It's like learning that your parents aren't all-knowing authorities. At first, this feels like a loss of security, but it's actually the beginning of genuine adulthood. The moment you can start making real choices rather than following inherited patterns. Moses couldn't speak fluently, yet became the greatest prophet. Beethoven composed his most profound works while deaf. Nietzsche himself wrote his most brilliant philosophy while suffering intense physical pain. The pattern is consistent. What seems like damage or limitation becomes the crack where unprecedented light enters. Your experience of meaninglessness? That's not your weakness. It's your initiation. Here's what happens when you stop fighting nihilism and start working with it. First, you feel the full weight of meaninglessness, not intellectually, viscerally. You let yourself experience that nothing you do will matter in 1,000 years, that the universe doesn't care about your existence, that all your achievements will be forgotten. Instead of rushing to cover this feeling with new purposes or distractions, you stay with it. You let it burn through all the false consolations. This is active nihilism, consciously dismantling illusions rather than desperately maintaining them. Then something unexpected happens. In the absence of inherited meanings, you notice something still remains: the drive to create, to express, to overcome. Not because it serves some higher purpose, but because that's what life does. A tree doesn't grow toward light because it believes in some cosmic mission. It grows because that's its nature. You begin to sense what Nietzsche called the innocence of becoming, action without needing cosmic justification. You create not because creation has ultimate meaning, but because you are a creative force. You love, not because love serves some divine plan, but because you have the capacity for love. This is when the transformation accelerates. Instead of asking, "What's the point?" you realize you are the point maker. Instead of seeking meaning, you become a meaning creator. The question shifts from "Why should I live?" to "How can I make life worth living?" The danger is that most people stop halfway. They deconstruct old meanings, but lack the strength to create new ones. They become what Nietzsche called last men, comfortable nihilists who seek only comfort and distraction, who have given up on greatness because what's the point? This passive nihilism is everywhere today. It's in the person who knows their job is meaningless but stays for the paycheck. It's in relationships maintained out of fear of being alone rather than genuine connection. It's in the endless consumption of entertainment to avoid confronting the void. Nietzsche warned this could last for centuries. Entire civilizations of people who've given up on life while still breathing. They mock anyone who takes things seriously, saying, "Nothing matters anyway." They've discovered the truth of meaninglessness, but lack the strength to do anything with it. This is why understanding what comes next is crucial, because there's a third stage beyond both naive belief and passive nihilism, but it requires a kind of strength most people never develop. There are three types of responses to nihilism that Nietzsche identified, and understanding them changes everything about how you navigate meaninglessness. Most people get stuck in the first two, never realizing the third exists. Each represents a different relationship to the void, and recognizing where you are is the first step toward transformation. Number 1. The denier. This person senses meaninglessness approaching and builds elaborate defenses against it. They double down on traditional beliefs, throw themselves into work, or constantly seek peak experiences to feel alive. They might become religious fundamentalists, workaholics, or adrenaline junkies, anything to avoid the confrontation with the void. You recognize a denier by their desperate intensity. They can't sit still with themselves. They fear silence because in silence, the questions arise. They often judge others who express doubt, because that doubt threatens their carefully maintained fortress. The tragedy is that they exhaust themselves maintaining illusions that part of them knows are false. Number 2. The last man. Nietzsche's most chilling prediction. These people have seen through traditional meanings, but respond with comfortable nihilism. They seek only pleasure, comfort, and distraction. They've given up on greatness, saying, "Why bother?" They binge entertainment, pursue small pleasures, avoid difficulty. The last man says things like, "Nothing matters, so just enjoy yourself," or "We're all going to die anyway." They've confused the absence of cosmic meaning with the absence of any possibility for human meaning. They're right that old values have collapsed, but they lack the creative power to forge new ones. They choose comfortable meaninglessness over the difficulty of creation. Number 3. The Übermensch. This isn't a superior being, but a human who has fully confronted nihilism and emerged transformed. They've accepted that no external source will provide meaning, so they've become a source of meaning themselves. They create values through their actions, give style to their character, and affirm life, including its suffering. The overman doesn't overcome nihilism by finding new absolute truths. They overcome it by no longer needing absolute truths. They act from abundance rather than lack, create from joy rather than desperation. They've transformed the terrifying freedom of meaninglessness into the exhilarating freedom of self-creation. When you understand all three together, you see the complete arc Nietzsche envisioned. The denier represents the past clinging to collapsing structures. The last man represents a degraded present passive acceptance of meaninglessness. The overman represents a possible future active creation of meaning through will to power. This is what Nietzsche meant when he wrote, "God is dead, and we have killed him." It's not a celebration, but a diagnosis. The old source of values has died, and now we face a choice. Deny this death, collapse into comfortable nihilism, or take on the terrifying responsibility of value creation. Most importantly, these aren't fixed categories, but stages of development. Everyone experiencing meaninglessness is somewhere on this trajectory. The question is whether you'll remain stuck or continue evolving. And here's the crucial insight. Moving from last man to overman requires passing through a desert. You must fully experience the absence of meaning before you can authentically create new meaning. There are no shortcuts. This isn't just about your personal psychology. We're living through a collective confrontation with nihilism that's reshaping entire civilizations. The meaning crisis you feel, millions are feeling it simultaneously, creating unprecedented social phenomena. Look at the explosion of depression and anxiety, especially among the young. Traditional psychiatry treats these as individual disorders. But what if they're rational responses to a culture that's lost its way? When society offers only empty consumerism and digital distraction, is it any wonder people feel empty and distracted? We see entire industries built on incomplete nihilism. Social media promises connection while delivering isolation. Self-help gurus promise transformation while reinforcing dependence. The economy demands endless growth while producing spiritual poverty. These aren't failures of the system, they are the system, perfectly designed to manage populations who've lost faith in higher purposes. Even our politics reflects this crisis. Without shared values rooted in something beyond preference, we get tribal warfare over competing nihilisms. One side denies the crisis exists, the other exploits it for power, and neither offers genuine transformation. We're watching civilizations of last men arguing over which comfortable numbness is superior. But hidden within this collective crisis is an opportunity that's never existed before. When entire populations simultaneously confront meaninglessness, the potential for mass transformation becomes possible. Not through new ideologies or movements, Nietzsche saw how those become new prisons, but through millions of individuals taking up the challenge of self-overcoming. People will resist this truth because accepting it means accepting ultimate responsibility. If meaning isn't given but created, then you can't blame God, society, or circumstances for your emptiness. You are responsible, able to respond, able to create, able to transform. This is terrifying. It's so much easier to believe you're depressed because of brain chemistry rather than confront the possibility that you're depressed because you're living someone else's life. It's comforting to think meaning exists somewhere out there waiting to be found, rather than accept you must forge it yourself. The resistance shows up as criticism. This is elitist. This is impractical. This leads to selfishness. But notice how these objections assume the very thing Nietzsche challenges, that values must come from outside, ourselves. They're demanding external validation for the idea that validation must come from within. It's not easy to see through these patterns because we're swimming in them. Every institution, every relationship, every habit assumes the old model. Meaning descends from above. To question this isn't just philosophical rebellion, it's psychological revolution. Your entire identity might be built on inherited meanings. Who are you if those foundations crumble? This is why most people who glimpse Nietzsche's vision retreat. Not because it's wrong, but because it demands too much. It asks you to become who you are, rather than who you've been told to be. When one person authentically embraces self-overcoming, it creates ripples that are impossible to predict. You see, the overman isn't a hermit creating meaning in isolation. They're a creative force that inspires others through example, not preaching. Think about how conformity works. People mirror the meaninglessness around them, creating a downward spiral. But the opposite is also true. When someone genuinely creates their own values and lives them fully, it gives others permission to do the same. Not by converting them to your values, but by demonstrating that value creation is possible. This is how cultures transform, not through mass movements, but through what Nietzsche called the secret work of the best souls. Individuals who've passed through nihilism and emerged creative become centers of gravity. Others sense their authenticity, their vitality, their refusal to accept comfortable lies. The network effect accelerates because each person who breaks free makes it easier for the next. Not easier in the sense of less challenging. The challenge remains total, but easier to believe it's possible. When you see someone living without cosmic guarantees, yet more alive than those clinging to false certainties, it changes your sense of what humans can be. Imagine a world where instead of inheriting dead values, each generation learns the art of value creation, where education teaches not what to think, but how to overcome yourself, where culture celebrates not conformity, but the courage to forge meaning in the void. This isn't utopia, it's evolution. So how do you work with this knowledge without being destroyed by it? Nietzsche offers a practice, not a belief system. Step 1. Trust your instinct for life over inherited beliefs. When you feel that something is life-denying, even if everyone says it's good, trust that feeling. Your body knows what enhances life and what diminishes it. This isn't hedonism. Often what enhances life is difficult, painful, requires overcoming, but it leads to greater vitality, not less. Step 2. Practice saying yes to what is. Nietzsche called this amor fati, love of fate. Not resignation, but affirmation. When you encounter suffering, instead of asking, why me? Ask, how will I use this? Every experience becomes material for self-overcoming rather than evidence that life is meaningless. Step 3. Create without needing cosmic approval. Make art, build relationships, pursue projects, not because they'll last forever, but because creating is what you do. A spider doesn't spin webs for immortality. It spins because that's its nature. Discover your nature through experiment, not introspection. Step 4. Seek out what challenges your strength. Comfort isn't the goal, growth is. Find what makes you stronger, more capable, more alive. This might be intellectual, physical, creative, relational. The specific form matters less than the direction, toward greater power over yourself. Step 5. Build your own values through action. Don't sit waiting for meaning to strike. Create it through what you do repeatedly. Your values aren't what you believe, but what you embody. Make them explicit through your choices, not your statements. Step 6. Connect with other value creators. Not to adopt their values, but to sharpen your own against theirs. Seek friends who challenge you to become more yourself, not those who let you remain comfortable. You stand at a crossroads that every human who's ever lived deeply has faced, but with a difference. You face it consciously, with maps drawn by those who've gone before. The choice isn't whether to believe in meaning or not. That's the old framework. The choice is whether to remain passive or become active in the face of meaninglessness. Either you accept the role of last man comfortable, distracted, slowly dying inside while your body persists. This path is seductive because it requires nothing of you. Stream another show, scroll another feed, numb another evening. Let the years pass in a haze of small pleasures and smaller pains. Many choose this, and who can blame them? At least it's not actively painful. Or you take up the terrible freedom Nietzsche discovered. The freedom to create meaning in a universe that provides none. This path offers no guarantees, no comfort, no rest. It demands you face every illusion, overcome every inherited limit, create values strong enough to sustain a life. It's the path of the artist facing a blank canvas, knowing no one will tell them what to paint. As Nietzsche discovered in his own life, this second path leads through madness and ecstasy, breakdown and breakthrough. It's not safe, but it's the only path that leads to genuine aliveness. The question isn't whether you're strong enough. No one is, at first. The question is whether you're willing to become strong enough through the attempt. When you integrate this understanding, specific changes occur. First, the desperate search for your purpose ends. You realize purpose isn't found but forged, not discovered but created through action. The anxiety of what should I do with my life transforms into curiosity. What can I create with this life? Your relationship to suffering fundamentally shifts. Instead of evidence that life is meaningless, suffering becomes the raw material for meaning creation. Every pain becomes a potential transformation. Every loss, an opportunity for new creation. You stop asking, why do bad things happen? And start asking, what will I do with what happens? The need for external validation dissolves. When you know meaning comes from within, others' opinions become information rather than identity. You might listen, might learn, but you no longer live for approval. Your center of gravity shifts from outside to inside. Most surprisingly, joy becomes possible without reason. When you stop needing cosmic justification for happiness, you can experience what Nietzsche called the great health vitality that comes from saying yes to life as it is, not despite suffering but including it, not after meaning is found but in the act of creating it. You become dangerous not to others but to dead systems. Your very existence challenges those still clinging to inherited meanings. Some will hate you for it, others will be inexplicably drawn. You become a walking question mark that forces others to examine their own foundations. Remember when I told you about Nietzsche collapsing in Turin, embracing that beaten horse? Most see this as his final breakdown, the mad philosopher destroyed by his own ideas. But what if it was something else? What if, in that moment, he was experiencing the full weight of existence, all its suffering, all its meaninglessness, and choosing to embrace it anyway? That horse represented life itself, beaten down, suffering without reason, continuing despite everything. And Nietzsche's response wasn't to explain the suffering or justify it, but to throw his arms around it, to say yes even to this, especially to this. This is the final secret hidden in his philosophy. The way beyond nihilism isn't through finding new reasons to live. It's through needing no reasons. It's through becoming someone who embraces existence so fully that asking, what's the point, no longer makes sense. The point is the embrace itself. You started this video feeling that everything is pointless. That feeling hasn't been refuted. It's been revealed as the beginning of genuine philosophy. The void you've been running from is the canvas on which you can create a life worth living. You are not the same person who started watching this. Something has shifted, perhaps subtly, perhaps dramatically. You've been initiated into a lineage of those who've stared into meaninglessness without blinking. You now carry what Nietzsche called the dangerous knowledge. You can't unknow that meaning isn't given but created. You can't return to the comfortable assumption that somewhere, somehow, there's a cosmic guarantee your life matters. You've eaten from the tree of knowledge, and like all such eating, it exiles you from the garden of naivety. But you've gained something in exchange, the possibility of becoming who you are rather than who you're supposed to be. You've joined the ranks of value creators, meaning forgers, those who build bridges over abysses. You're no longer waiting for permission to matter. You're giving yourself that permission through what you create. The question isn't whether you'll use this knowledge. You can't help but use it. Once seen, some things can't be unseen. The question is, how consciously you'll wield it. Will you let it work through you passively, or will you take up the hammer and forge something unprecedented? Every morning, you'll wake to the same existential freedom that terrified and exhilarated Nietzsche. No one will tell you what your life means. The universe will remain silent about your purpose. And in that silence, you'll hear something else. The sound of your own creative power, waiting to transform meaninglessness into meaning. What will you create with this terrible freedom? How will you transform the lead of nihilism into the gold of affirmation? Who will you become when no one is watching, when no cosmic auditor is keeping score? The void is still there. It always was, always will be. But now you know, the void isn't empty. It's pregnant with every possibility you have the courage to create.